So I was working on writing an IELTS Task 1 sample answer today, and I noticed something really interesting, and it made me want to make this video to share with you today. So usually when I write these, I actually just make up my own questions and kind of work with that. But today I thought maybe I'll do something different, and because it's Task 1, I thought maybe I'll work on a quite famous Task 1 question, one that you'll see on lots and lots of different IELTS websites. So I ran my answer and I kind of thought, oh, well, I wonder what other IELTS teachers or IELTS tutors, IELTS websites have written for this answer. And what I found out was actually that lots of the sample answers out there are getting the real fundamentals of IELTS Task 1 writing completely wrong. So I decided to make this presentation and to just sit down, jump on the camera, and start to talk through exactly what that mistake is and how you can avoid making that same mistake yourself. So I think maybe a lot of students kind of don't notice this because they just look straight at the graph. But if you look at your IELTS Task 1 questions, you'll see a sentence that looks something like this one up here. And the important thing to notice about this sentence is it's not just asking you to give all the details, it's actually asking you to summarize the information. And it says this phrase like select and report the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So this is something that is in, or something like this is in every IELTS Task 1 question for the academic test that you'll see. But lots of people end up getting this wrong, and by doing so you can actually make quite a negative impact to your IELTS writing score. These are the task response grading criteria, or some of the task response grading criteria for IELTS writing academic task 1. So this is basically 25% of your task 1 grade comes from these criteria above my head. Now, there's a couple of things that I think are interesting here. The first one is if you don't highlight key criteria based on this, you can't get higher than a band 4, which is probably not a band that is going to help you do anything. So you get a band 4, it's going to drag down the rest of your grade. So that's something you really want to avoid. The other thing that I think is quite interesting here is even when you get to band 7, which I think is a fairly high band, you don't need to be that perfect at selecting the completely accurate best information, right? You have to do some, but it could be more fully extended. So I think selecting information is what we might call an easy win. It's something you can do that isn't that hard, but that can score you a lot of points. Because if you do this right and you do give enough detail with your task response, you can really get a very high score for task response, and this will drag up the rest of your IELTS grade. So the outline should be the second of 4 paragraphs in your IELTS Task 1. So the introduction is usually just 1 or 2 sentences, and it basically just says what the graph is about. After that, you have your outline, which will be 2 to 3 sentences, and this really highlights the most important points in the whole of the graph. And then after that, you'll have your body paragraph 1 and body paragraph 2, where you go into a little bit more detail. So when you have to write this, the 2 most common discourse markers we'll use to start this off will be overall or in brief, and you just drop a comma after one of those. Start your paragraph with one of these 2. Just remember one. Your examiner won't know if you're reusing the same one all the time. Start with one of them and just remember it and use it every time you write this paragraph. Now, once you've written overall, you're going to carry on by giving some of the most important features. Now, this really depends on what type of essay you're looking at. We'll have a look at that in a second. But the key thing to remember about the outline is this isn't the place to start giving numbers from the data, right? That's not what it's for. The point is to really highlight what the main trends or the main changes or the most important features are in whatever type of chart or table or graph or map you're looking at. So these are some questions you might ask yourself to help you come up with ideas or to help you think of the most important points. So if it's something to do with numbers, this might be a kind of table of numbers or a line chart or a bar chart. Any of these, you should be thinking about biggest and smallest are often very important to look at, and also any kind of changes that happen. So in a bar chart, you might start with one thing being the largest and it kind of changes to become the smallest. There's all sorts of things that could be going on in one of these charts with numbers, and usually there's plenty to talk about there. Now, for a map, it's a little bit more difficult to identify what is the change that really matters. So maybe look for which things really stand out. Do things get bigger or smaller? Do they become more developed or less developed? What are the big changes that are happening if you had to just pick one or two things? What stands out? And for a process map, you often want to look for what are the key stages here. So you might have like 9 stages on a process map. Sometimes they can be very detailed, but often you can break down those stages into a few kind of bigger stages, and we'll have a look at that in a second. So I want to start off by having a look at the line graph, which I guess kind of inspired this video. So here, this actually doesn't look like a particularly detailed line graph. It's tricky in a few ways, but I think it doesn't give you much to talk about. But even with this one that doesn't have a lot of lines to describe, there's plenty to say in an outline. So the first thing you can say is that if you look at this line that represents the population of India, it starts off lower than China, and by the end of the line graph, it has overtaken China. So that's something you could mention. And the other thing you can kind of say about it is that it's grown. Okay, so when we're looking at these type of changes over time, we'll often want to say, did something go up? Did something go down? What went on here in the broad picture? But I won't start saying, oh, it grew from 1 billion to 1.6 billion, or give any numbers from it. I'll just kind of say it grew over the time period. Now, the one for China is maybe more interesting. It grew up to a point, and then it hit a peak, and then it started to fall afterwards. And that's something very common you'll see in these line graphs. Often, one of them will go up, one of them go down, or something will be doing something interesting somewhere in there, either growing and falling and then growing. This next one here is a map, and on this map we can see, well, there's actually lots to describe, right? We've got restaurants, we've got receptions, we've got all these huts, we've got trees moving around, we've added a pier, all these things, right? But the big change you can see in this graph is they've built a lot of stuff. There wasn't that much there before, and now there's quite a lot there. So you can basically just say that, use nice language to say it, and maybe highlight, well, yes, there are more facilities and there are more places to stay than there were in the past. And this will really just give you a summary. But we won't start saying things like, oh, the restaurant is to the north of the reception, or the huts are connected by footpath. That's very detailed. That wouldn't go in our overview. But the fact that there is a reception, the fact that there are huts, that definitely is the sort of thing that could go in an overview. Finally, what we have here is a process diagram. So this is showing the process of recycling a plastic bottle. Now, there are a couple of different ways you can look at these. The first one is kind of location, right? So in this one, I don't know if there really are that many locations. You have the bin and you have the recycling center. And I guess you have the last stage where they become end products again. The other way you can break something down into stages that's often very useful for IELTS is to look at kind of the state it is in. And by state, I kind of mean what type of product or what type of thing you're dealing with. So at the start here, you can see it's a bottle, and through 1, 2, and 3, it's a bottle all the way through that. But then eventually it becomes a block, then it becomes raw materials, and then it becomes end products. So by highlighting some of those stages, you wouldn't have to talk about all of them. You could potentially break it down into a few bigger stages, because it's a bottle for quite a while, and then it goes through a few different steps. You might say it is a bottle, then it becomes pellets, then it becomes an end product again, and that might sort of highlight the key points for this type of essay. So the most important thing to remember about this is simply to try and write the outline. I was really shocked earlier when I was looking at some of these essays online, and I don't want to name and shame people or kind of highlight whose essays I think were bad, but if you go and look for the India and China essay, sample essays online after watching this, you will absolutely find some examples of Band 9 essays that simply don't have this outline. And it's in the grading criteria, right? You need to highlight this key information. And if you don't do it, you're not going to get a Band 9 or even a Band 7. You're really going to struggle to get a high score in your exam if you're not doing this. So please make sure you try. If you want to see some examples of this, check out some of the links in the description. I will link to some of my sample Band 9 essays that do have a good example of the description. Finally, it makes a massive difference to me if you like and subscribe to this channel. It will also mean that you see all of our new videos. So if you did enjoy this, if you did find this video useful, please make sure you like and subscribe down below.